The most at-risk industries like financial, tech, and government agencies use web isolation to keep their networks and users secure. The Silo Web Isolation platform by Authenticate allows users to experience the web in full isolation, eliminating the chance of a web-borne cyber attack. You can interact with malicious files and websites without worry, even if you're working remotely. Authenticate enables anyone, anywhere, on any device to experience the web without risk. See how it works at securityweekly.com/authenticate. Deepwatch provides innovative managed security services that empower organizations to be more resilient against today's evolving cyber threats. Deepwatch offers game-changing capabilities in managed detection and response, managed endpoint detection and response, and vulnerability management, all delivered through a unique squad model, a dedicated group of security experts that works directly with each client. From managed security operations to threat hunting to continuous measurement of security readiness, Deepwatch is advancing the service of managed security. Measure your SecOps maturity for free by visiting securityweekly.com/Deepwatch. Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to view the agendas and register for free. We're almost at 500, and that number keeps clicking up. In our upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you'll learn how to thwart attackers using deception, how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view all of our previously recorded webcasts, including that great risk metrics one with Deepwatch that we did a couple weeks ago. All right, we don't have Jason today for stories, so Paul and I are going to get through these probably faster than we want to. So let's see. The CISO's dilemma: balancing security productivity with housebound workforce. Some interesting stats in here. That's what I wanted to hit on a little bit. Out of the CISO survey, 87% believe that remote work is a permanent workflow. Only 13% believe they will go back to a full-time office-based work. I thought that was a really, really interesting number. I've heard numbers maybe, 30%. I mean, this is 87%. That's a really high number.
I also think, Matt, it's all about how you ask the question. And I think there's some missing pieces of that question is what percentage of your workforce will stay remote? And what percentage will go back to the office, and what would a hybrid model look like? In other words, I think it's going to be a little more evenly split. I do think that probably, half or 40% of the workforce likely going to stay remote. I think that the other half is going to be some kind of hybrid model, because I think there's positions, my opinion, that make sense for them to continue working remotely, right? Software developers, they can work remotely really well, right? In fact, they probably work a lot better when they're remote without any distraction. Anyone that's ever written any amount of software ever knows that once you get in that flow, that if you break that flow, it takes you 2 to 3 times as long to get back into the flow. So I think there will be half that likely, in my opinion, will stay remote. The other half is going to be some kind of mixture, right? A couple days a week they might work from home. A couple days a week they're going to go in the office. Maybe there's a week on, a week off, week at home, a week. And that also could be project dependent as well. Hey, you know what? For the next month or two or whatever, you're going to work from home, or the next month or two, you're going to work in the office because that's the project that you've been assigned. It deems it maybe not necessary, but you can be more effective with your project working from the office. So I think a lot of these articles, Matt, that are talking about these different statistics, and it's going to be like a pure 0 or 1. I think there's a lot of variances in there.
Yeah. And they highlight like 3 core areas here around web browsing, third-party apps, and BYOD, right? And kind of what the response is. This is pretty challenging, right? I mean, all right, am I going to allow web browsing to all? Am I going to shove people through that VPN and then put all my web browsing filters on them, or am I just going to let them, connect directly to the internet? I mean, these are all issues that people have to think about. I think this is going to morph and continue to evolve over time, because we've seen some of the challenges with VPN technologies and issues around that. I mean, are you going to continue to enforce web browsing restrictions? What are you going to do with third-party software? What are you going to do with the home PC versus the corporate PC? There is no clear-cut answer here for any organization. And I think it's going to take time to figure out what's working and what's not working in this new environment.
Agreed. And there's a lot of newer technologies out there that I believe the CISOs are going to have to evaluate and maybe perhaps reevaluate. I know, Matt, we've talked about the SD-WAN technology and how it's being used in things like SASE and also CASB, and how you're not a huge fan of the, funneling everything through all one thing. What I found, specifically my webcast upcoming with Perimeter 81, they're actually talking about this. It's a distributed service edge. So you're not funneling them through one thing. That distributed piece, I'm like, oh, that addresses the concern. Now we can start to have a further conversation about how do I validate who's coming on my service edge and who isn't, to address your point of, that was from the article, right? Do I allow the home PC to connect or not? So I think that as technology evolves, you're going to address some of these big challenges or issues that we have with this technology, and may allow us to move forward, hopefully in a more secure fashion.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up during Kevin's interview in the last segment was about the endpoint. And hey, aren't we checking the endpoint to make sure it's secure before we let them connect? I'm like, really? I mean, maybe in theory we are, but are we actually doing that with home PCs? And what's interesting is at the bottom of this article, it talks about some of the different choices you can make with these BYOD. And one of the jokes was, well, isn't this zero trust? Well, only 4% say they're using a zero trust architecture. So zero trust isn't saving us. 13% utilize multi-factor authentication. 13%. Think about that number for a second. That's really low.
Yeah.
24% utilizing VPNs, 36% deploying virtual desktops, and 22% don't allow access to corporate networks or applications at all from non-corporate devices. There's a lot to unpack in that little section.
Yeah, there is.
Right? I mean, so we don't see high adoption of zero trust architectures, even though it's all the rage. We're still not doing basic two-factor authentication, and VPNs still 0.25% of the usage.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is hard, and I think that there are some more advanced organizations that have got a lot of that whole technology list you rattled off doing it correctly, but that's going to take time before it starts trickling down, and we're able to, I think one of the primary goals, and I've been struggling with this better part of my career because I worked at a university where in the fall, this is pre-COVID obviously, all the students would come back to school with all their own computers. And that was a security nightmare. And now we pretty much have the same nightmare where all of our employees could conceivably bring their own systems to access our things that are now in the cloud. And how do we deal with that? Google has Beyond Corp, I think is what they called it, right? Is that model to validate and trust based on some level of validation. And I hope that continues to evolve. I believe there are organizations implementing it very well, but it's not across the masses, right?
Yeah, exactly right. This next article talks about the 7 cybersecurity trends for 2021. Look, there's no surprises in here. Remote workers are going to be a focus of cyber criminals. Yeah, it's going to be phishing campaigns going after remote workers to try to compromise them in some form or fashion. Back to the segment with Kevin right before this. I mean, phishing is going to be one of those direct attack vectors to that remote workforce in 2021.
I think there will be convergence across security solutions, and I think there will be some leveraging of your existing platforms to collect intelligence. But in that, ironically, you have to be intelligent about that. I thought Kevin brought up a great point that once you study it, you realize, I really do need extra protection here for a lot of reasons because of the gaps that may exist in my current technology platform. Microsoft 365 as an example, but also the threat and attack path being so popular and the impact being so great, that's an area where you're going to want that. But when it comes to maybe collecting telemetry for indicators of compromise from your network, from your logs, from your endpoints, you can accomplish a lot of that with what's built into a lot of these operating systems, built into your cloud and Active Directory infrastructure, and then have one solution that is cross-functional across teams to analyze that telemetry. To me, that's hopefully something that takes shape in 2021.
Right. It's bringing them together in an effective way. We will talk about time to value, I think, in a couple other articles. We did cover a story this morning on Application Security Weekly about the potential impact to retail. Now, this says financial organizations beware, more attacks are coming, but retail, we're entering the holiday season. There was a survey out on the susceptibility of some of these retail websites, the US versus the UK and some stuff. There's a lot of old stuff. Almost a quarter of the applications running in the retail space have outdated software components. So yes, we're going to see more of these types of attacks. Money is always part of the incentive, so the financials or retailers are definitely going to continue under attack. What I thought was interesting, Paul, is this seventh one, right? And again, a little bit to the conversation we had with Kevin last segment, the adoption of new technologies and increase in internet users means most of the world's population is great risk of data exposure, right? This whole, we're moving so fast to new technologies to augment what was on-prem. But we're putting a lot of trust potentially in some of those platforms, and maybe we shouldn't, because there's still some risk components we don't fully understand in those environments yet. And do they have all the capabilities we need? That's going to be a big challenge, I think, for organizations as they continue to move into 2021.
I think a lot of the capabilities are there. I think the knowledge and understanding of how to effectively use those capabilities that could speak to security is pretty low.
Yeah.
And of course, I think we're going to still have some big platform issues, but I think those are going to be fewer in number than open S3 buckets or insecure container environments that lead to compromise.
Let's hope so. Now, there is good news out of the pandemic. We are all now better trainable, having lived in this remote environment. So I thought this is an interesting spin on this article, which is, look, we've had to kind of train our employees, and they're more trainable now because we've used video conferencing and some of these other tools to help train them. The question I have is, will that improve our overall security awareness programs because we're better trainable, or was that only for things we really cared about, like our daily jobs, and not necessarily security?
Well, one thing is interesting is whose time is being used when you train. Is that the employee's personal time? Is that the employer's time when you're essentially on the clock? But what the interesting thing about working from home that we've pointed out numerous times on this show is when's on the clock and off the clock. When you're working from home, those lines can become blurred. And I think organizations need to have a really good policy before they start mandating things like you need to do this training. And I think that there could be times where you tell the employee, I want you to do this level of training and I want you to use your work time to do that. But if you want to go above and beyond, then you can use some of your personal time. Mandating all of it in either direction, I think, is unfair, really. And there has to be some flexibility. That's where I kind of see the trainable workforce is really a time management thing.
It is. And it's weird. Time management's gotten a lot different under full-time remote work, right? Like before, I know I'm going to the airport and I'm going to hop on a plane and I know I'm going to have a bunch of dead time on an airplane. I'm going to crank through a bunch of stuff. That doesn't really exist when you're at home all the time because you literally walk from your desk in this office or in this room over to the kitchen table for dinner. And balancing that is a lot different now than it ever has been. And when you throw training on top of that, it only makes it probably
and
harder.
balancing in a pandemic is difficult too, because a lot of stuff is closed or shut down. People aren't really traveling to go. You may have some time to do some traveling if hey, maybe the rest of your family is going to take a half a day trip to go visit some relatives or whatever while you're at work. And, now you've got some time to maybe catch up on that stuff's not happening now. Mm-hmm. Everyone's trapped in the house together, driving each other nuts for the most part, in a good way.
Yeah.
But
usually a good way.
Yeah.
It's like, get your homework done. Get off the video monitor.
Oh, yeah. The whole family has to practice time management now.
Exactly. Gartner had their, I think it's their CIO symposium over in Europe. I think it was last week. So there's a couple articles that came out of Gartner and that symposium. The first one is all about time to value. And what's going to happen is not only are budgets constrained, but now spend is going to be measured in a different way. It's not about doing a PC refresh per se. It's about what new technologies am I going to deploy that get me time to value faster? And so we're going to see the shift at the C-level around budgets, time to value. It was funny, Paul, because we actually talked a little bit about this on my morning meeting with the executive team at CRA this morning. We were talking about, where do you get additional revenue, but also not incur costs, right? Mm-hmm. Because everybody wants to look at both sides of this. We're seeing the same thing with technology spend. It's not just about how much you spend, but how quickly can you get it implemented and get that value back out of it. That is the new metric for CIOs.
Yeah. And I guess it always has been, but your time to value, it maybe was longer before we had a lot of the technology that we have today.
Could be. I mean, look, I remember the days of everybody wanting to build the advanced SOC and making these large investments and taking 12, 18 months to build this thing out. That doesn't exist anymore. In this environment, it's like, to Kevin's point, I need capabilities. Can I deploy them in a day and get value out of it? I mean, that's the new metric. I mean, so we're going from, year to year and a half down to day metrics. I think that's a little different. Now, I think technology's gotten a little better from a deployment standpoint. We have better offerings out there. But look, some of these solutions still take time, months to bring up. That's not going to fly in this new world.
No, I agree. We've always said it. The solutions companies that can deliver a short time to value will win in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second article is Composability will make businesses more resilient and agile. Now, this is this concept of composable infrastructure. And we've seen this start to play out, right? We're taking, we're moving more stuff into cloud. We can spin stuff up and down. And really, they're using this as a way to say, look, this is also part of your resilient and agility strategy. Because let's say we go back to in-person activities. Maybe I need to bring scale for certain systems up. Maybe I do stay, or we do that and then we go back to remote. So I got to spin things down, right? So this concept of composable infrastructure is a big part of some of this resiliency and agility for companies. And they talk a lot about things like infrastructure as code, immutable infrastructure, and things that are precursors to get to this composable infrastructure kind of way. That really means to me that, like, the dedicated data centers are pretty much dead.
I mean, unless you're Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. I mean, they still have... Someone has to have the physical infrastructure somewhere, but I think that's less and less. And I think that if you're going to be in business and be a leader, be a category king, in my opinion, reading this article really underscores two technologies that you need. And this is part of your security strategy as well. The infrastructure has to be composable, as this article states, and you have to be leveraging some type of AI/machine learning inside, whether it's in your security program, whether it's for the product that you're building, whether it's for IT. The ability of these two different types of technologies combined together and doing it right. A lot of people get it wrong, but doing it right, you will be on the road to being your category king.
Yeah.
It was Mark Cuban that pointed out the artificial intelligence aspect of it as, if you're not paying attention to that today, it's like you're sitting in the 90s going, hey, that internet thing could take off. We'll consider it someday. Like, it's obviously, if you weren't on that bus, the bus left and that was it. And you got left behind in the dust. I think artificial intelligence is the same way. What's different between the two and more like the composability immutable infrastructure is you have to do it well and apply those technologies correctly, because you can do it wrong and that could set you back.
Yeah, and the question is, do you leverage a platform, multiple platforms, which kind of leads me into this next article a little bit. And the reason I linked them this way is when I think about composable infrastructure and I look at different artificial intelligence and ML processes out there, well, I might be corporate-wise, I might be Azure, but Google's got better capabilities on the analytics side. So now I've got multi-clouds. Okay, and I think we're gonna see more of these types of scenarios. So this last article is like, how do I manage that multi-cloud environment? Because now I have two really important third-party vendors in the mix that are really driving my business agility and resilience strategy. So how do I better manage these as I move forward? So this article kind of brings in some concepts around third-party vendor management, more at a multi-cloud environment level. So I mean, obviously you've got to establish some governance guidelines, but it's this concept of extensible infrastructure, right? So if you think about composable infrastructure, which is the last article, and extensible infrastructure, now you have this really interesting combination of, yes, I can get rid of it, but it has to scale up and scale down as I move my environment. That creates a lot of complexity in a multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, for sure. And that also extends out into other areas of the business too. What about your SaaS services and or backend services as well? You can go crazy. You can be at every major cloud provider. You can have dozens and dozens of SaaS services and have integrations into all these other kind of backend services. For example, one of the ones we're looking at is we want to transcribe audio and video. That's a cool back-end service, right? It's not necessarily a SaaS service. SaaS service is more like Dropbox or Microsoft 365. Then you've got multi-cloud infrastructure where I'm actually running code and leveraging maybe other services that are in AWS, GCP, and Azure. And your attack surface is gigantic. And you've got that traditional IT problem where you've just got too many systems to manage and integrate with together. And both of those are bad for security.
Yeah. But that's on the back office side. Let's think about the front office for a second, right? So now I need to integrate with my CRM because I need to bring my sales contracts in for us to manage our sponsor programs. I have to book guests. They might be coming from a different system or source, right? So it's not only services on the back end, but if we think about creating operational efficiencies on the front end, now I'm integrating some of these other cloud SaaS services into yet another cloud service because I don't know where Naviga and HubSpot and some of these services are hosted. I could guess. I could probably research it. But I know our software is hosted in AWS, right? So now I've got all these intricacies that have to be managed across these different environments. And that creates a lot of complexity.
Yeah, in creating that long-term sustainability, maintenance, and direction is so hard today based on the conversation we just had, Matt, right? How do you pick and choose and stick down one path without getting distracted and going off and building a solution and then having it not all fit together nicely?
Right. And then I throw remote work in and a few other things, and you can just see where the spiral's out of control. And I think, having a good plan, really understanding where those different assets are, and then just thinking about it in a much more holistic way are going to be some key drivers. But you can't assume, back to our initial discussion, just because I outsource the service, I'm not responsible for the risk, because the risk is still going to sit with the organization regardless of who's actually running that service. And I think that's the one thing we can't forget about.
Yeah, because you have to validate all of those third parties in some capacity.
Absolutely. Like I said a long time ago, part of the CISO's role is a governance role as he manages all these third-party relationships. Somebody has to own understanding the risk profile of those third parties. You may not be operationalizing the firewall or some of those other things in there because DevOps is doing it, but you still got to govern the risk associated with all those platforms, and that's more of a governance role than it has been for the CISOs traditionally.
You have to develop a policy and stick to it. And traditionally that policy was like, here's how I handle my data on my own network. Now it's how do I handle my data and users and roles and responsibility across dozens and dozens of different providers and third parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Challenges for everyone for the rest of this year and for next year. And Paul, thank you. You and Jason have the helm next week while I go get a couple days of R&R. I'd like to thank everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.